But it's the everyday minute things that allow, that determine or shape the way we characterize data. And that's where we as, when we are in a space of knowledge building, we do have certain kinds of descriptive power and evaluative power that we use on, we potentially misuse. That doesn't mean only academics have this power. There are various actors in various sectors of the world that have this power, and we'll get to that in different ways today as well. So the data is referent, right? It's part of a social process with political overtones. I'm sorry for that SL there. I thought I took it off. And that data is always in real-time transformation in ways that cut across notions of nature and culture. So yesterday's object exercise would have made that a little more in your face about that. We all know this, but sometimes knowing doesn't mean we kind of hold ourselves to it. So, so here we are coming to the point where she's not here yet. She asked me, was it Nupur? No, not Nupur. She asked me the question about the ethnographer becoming a spinner and how that, yeah, Devjani, that conflates. I'll get all your names by the time I'm back in Bowling Green and I see all of you on Facebook again. Sorry about that. So here you have the issue of copresence, right? So whether it is as a meme or otherwise, it's not necessary that this young person is actually asking the question of this young woman. But for us, this image of co-presence does things, right? So whether it's in the form of memes or whether it's in the form of microfinance sites or otherwise, we are producing a co-presence, which actually is not objective, but because the visuality, the co-presence seems like you brought this person online, right? So in this case, of course, people think clicking like on Facebook helps me. I mean, there's a strategic performative angle to it. It's kind of fun. But when you think about the bottom of the pyramid as the consumer, which seems to be increasingly the paradigm nowadays, right? We are consumer citizens, and once, isn't that also what you do with the Aadhaar card? You become a consumer citizen once you get coded through the identifications, the identity offered to you digitally and nationally. So what happens through attempts to get the subaltern, so to speak, incorporated into a system, informal sector, right? She's not here, Devjani, but people need to be coded into a system. This is more difficult in our global south context. So the things like demonetization and Aadhaar card were pointed out as ways to try to suddenly get people into the system. And most technical software people and engineers would see this as a solution that isn't problematic at all, because that's an engineering solution. That's a software solution. But juxtapose it with the intriguing software solution offered to us by a Facebook employee for the problem of doxing and revenge porn, where it was told to us that if we send them our nude pictures, then they could prevent revenge porn. So engineering solutions without context sound pretty ridiculous. But who's going to tell engineers this? Let's do it. So this kind of a image, it does suggest the absence, right? We are trying to highlight the absence, but it's also suggesting co-presence, even though the person is not co-present in this sphere. So who is co-present and where is something that we think in terms of that. So issues of voice and empowerment are no longer easily addressed through access to material and cultural capital from West or through resistance to what may be perceived as westernization or neoliberalization. The digital divide is not just about who gets to be at a computer terminal or who has a cell phone or how many gadgets, towers, and televisions are installed in rural third worlds. In fact, subaltern access to the global is fraught with issues such as populations in the global south who may have access to mobile phones, but not have access to bank accounts or be considered bankable. Or in the case of the US, perhaps the urban poor who have bad credit or no credit histories at all. So drawing on several years of ethnographic investigations and several years more since I started this presentation, and in-depth visual analysis of social media websites, our analysis, in the sense that this was teamwork, when you look at the book Cyberculture and Subaltern and you look at the book Online Philanthropy, you will see that several of the chapters are co-authored with mostly my graduate students. And I think Cyberculture and Subaltern I also co-authored with a couple of my NGO colleagues who work in Daskarandhra. So this is a collaborative project in that sense, but remember the co's I talk about. Some co's work in certain projects, some co's don't, and it's only in the writing that these people came as co-authors, but there were many others who were part of the co-meaning production of the knowledge, co-knowledge production. Not equal, but so in the writing is what that knowledge, the knowledge makes you a co-author. The production of Digital Subaltern 2.0 is based in a neoliberal framing of empowerment. And here I refer to Aradhana Sharma's work on the logics of empowerment. The book is really good, you should read it. And she draws that notion from Barbara Cruikshank's work regarding the same topic of empowerment and neoliberal framing. Pardon? I don't remember the title of Cruikshank's work, but I could look it up and I'll put it up for you guys. But Aradhana Sharma's is Logics of Empowerment. You will find Cruikshank's work cited in Aradhana Sharma's work, but I think for all of you, Aradhana Sharma's work will speak to you in various ways. Even though it was 10 years ago that it was published, it still will speak to you, and it's a good, valid project to look at. So thus, this production looks at how online tools are used to produce and commodify as a kind of subaltern voice, images of socioculture empoweredness. Empoweredness, how does empowerment look? They are going to tell us the kind of empowerment it's going to, so we often look for empowerment in a very specific form, right? Through the promise of, as I mentioned previously, a level playing field. So that's what I was saying in response yesterday, in the sense that when I say things like the ethnographer becomes spinner, immediately in the hearing, you think of a level playing field. It's not a level playing field, right? Or the spinner becoming an ethnographer is not also a level playing field in the sense that as the spinner becomes an ethnographer, depending on who the spinner is, she may not be contributing to the knowledge formation, official or formal structures of knowledge formation that are authorized as the knowledge that will describe their lives, right? So in that sense, the level playing field produced within online socio-financial platforms such as kiva.org, microgram.com, microplace.com, some of them exist, I think we also have Rangde here, rangde.com, an engineering solution to the problem of microfinance and access. And we also have various others just budding because these are startups, right? Technology startups that need content. Any technology startup needs content. If you don't have content, it doesn't happen. So you can put up a shadi.com, and that becomes a great startup because lots of people want to use it. So it can be sloppy, but people will make it somehow work for them because it's doing something for them. Similarly, apparently, with these online microfinance, just as with online shopping. So I've also looked at issues around digital money through examining marketing campaigns around M-Pesa in Kenya. So the sites that I've looked at think in terms, are in terms of global north to dislocated subalterns in the global south or even in the global north, but staged for a westernized audience, and that would include us. So the local souths are staged to the local global souths, are then connected to located subalterns, staged, scattered, and thrown out into the global. Let me see. Oh, we went back to that, did we? I think I'm playing with this, and that's where we are going there. Previous. So we did go back to this, and I mentioned that. So let's go to who is co-present and where. When is the idea of co-misleading, right? We need to hold on to this. This is why the Q&A sessions are so important in that they enable me to flesh out the very points that I'm thinking through. And so if you see me really excited, it's not because I'm trying to be defensive or trying to say I'm right. That's not what it is. It's because you have said something that will allow me to clearly, really clarify it in a way that it gets translated. So when is the idea of co-misleading? We talked about levels of even in terms of your interviews and in terms of writing and other things. So hold on to that. So the central question for this project was how do nonprofits use new media tools to make claims that they empower the poor. I do want to qualify this because it sounds like I'm being sarcastic about the average nonprofit worker and the NGO worker, as if they come with this cynical idea of they believe that they are empowering them. So this is not a moral judgment or a value judgment on people who strongly believe that, because we were all there once, we might still be there. So it's not a value judgment. But I do want to say that at some point, it becomes claims to empowerment. Because as we talked yesterday, some of it is the impossibility of that in certain hierarchies. And that's not to provide hopelessness, but it's about trying to rethink the structure and rethink the ways in which to do this. So the dual processes of NGOization and ITization, which would be, I think, is chapter 2 of the online philanthropy book, produce global communities of production and consumption at this coded interface. If you look here at this image is a screen cap from kiva.org, where there is it's recent. We've been watching Kiva since way back in 2005, 6, I think, or 7, and we've been writing about it since when our first publication came out, maybe 2008, I'm not sure. And so it's interesting to watch how over the years they've developed and transformed the way in which they've done the representations, right? So early representations were very clearly objectifying the person of color or the person from the global south. And slowly you could see this attempt to again create this level playing field along lines of race, along the lines of geography, along the lines of different class sections. And one of the things that the level playing field puts forth is, here's an entrepreneur, she is from Kenya. Here's an entrepreneur, she's from the US. By the way, she could very well be from the US, right? So it's creating a very interesting, Oakland, right, California. So it's creating this very interesting reproduction of racial global south, global north dynamics, where, again, disappearing the global north person of color in a particular way, and encouraging the global south person of comparative privilege to occupy this space, which that's there. And the other thing is just visually conflating the two in a different way. It's like if you are an entrepreneur, you can then level the playing field. We're all aspiring to this neoliberal individualistic mode of empowerment. So hierarchies of literature, culture, and everyday practice shape the communication and presence of nonprofit advocacy online, right? This is where earlier this week, I also mentioned that we as academics have more of a role than becoming the NGO worker or the activist, because we need to use the skills that we develop. Because what a nonprofit worker does not have is the huge body of, a huge amount of time you've spent on reading, writing, thinking through, and developing these analytical skills. Nor do they have, I mean, I know a lot of people think that research time is wasted time, but that's our job, and that's not a waste of time. Because imagine that the nonprofit worker actually had time to think through the issues of a framework they put forward. They might have thought it differently, right? And several of you are probably coming from these locations into academic ways of doing things. So in that sense, rather than rush towards proving or kind of making our lives, quote unquote, worthwhile by becoming what the rest of the world might call activist or entrepreneur or corporate actor, even though we have been trained this way, sometimes it is better to offer from within what we are able to do, which is transformative techniques, right? And then I'll talk about, I'll problematize the idea of transformation through what we do, because transformation has to be looked at very suspiciously as well, as we'll see later. So if we then are able to work through a collaboration, rather than saying, I am you and you am I, and competing. Oh, we talked about you, but we'll get back to it. Let me get back to her slide. Go back. But if we did that, rather than say, I am you and you am I, and we're going to compete for the same things, that's responding to a structure that says, how are you going to justify your existence? You are just sitting around and thinking. And then at the same time saying, let's stop these people from thinking, because the minute they start thinking, there might be trouble, right? So the point there is use the skills you have and collaborate, co-work. This was in reference to you, the question that came up yesterday, okay? So, yeah, I'll just go back to the next ones. So again, go back to the object exercise and think about the data's referent and the social process with political overtones. Go back to thinking about the two images that I put up. One was used to rupture assumptions. But what was interesting is that I think it was also a meme that came out of a particular kind of NGO that claims to empower workers by giving work, right? The right to work and give work is the hashtag that she started, Sama Source, which is again piecemeal digital work like Mechanical Turk and others. So that's the interesting kind of ways in which our irony is taken in and again commodified, right? And then you think about how Kiva is using those, conflating and also working to elide racial and economic unevenness. Yes?
So you'd come to University of Hyderabad in 2015, I think, or 16, and you had just finished, I think, your work on online philanthropy.
Yes.
And you'd mentioned that, so while Americans would surf online and, keep clicking stuff, they would see, like, contribute $1 or $2 for this, and we'll buy you sheep, we'll buy somebody's sheep from some other country.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking of that. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Or profiles where somebody's saying, I want to unravel silk saris to produce something, which actually means something else for people in the DIY communities where we unravel to do other things. But it's not the same thing when somebody in Nepal from a comparatively poor location has to do it, right? So that's the conflation we're talking about, which is why I was so excited when she pointed out that the ethnographer becomes spinner it misses the power dynamics. Yes, and that's what I meant. I mean, a lot of the previous talks that I've been doing over the years, they're coming back in this forum in different ways. So here's a visual, again, probably dated, because it's a visual we've been using. Again, I probably used it in 2015, but I've been using as I revised and resubmitted a chapter for first trying to publish it as a journal article, then as a co-authored journal article, then eventually became a book chapter in my online philanthropy book. I mean, these are complex kind of contexts we're trying to communicate, and depending who your readers are, we might not be able to translate it in a unidimensional translation that perhaps is expected. So putting it in a book with other kinds of connected analyses and with the possibility of an introduction and conclusion and other essays, contextualize that in a different way. So over here then we have somebody that to the gaze of the women we were talking about yesterday, the spinner, the ethnographer becoming spinner. This looks like a fellow craftswoman, but very ever so gently not equal to the westernized self, right? So two functions happen here in terms of affective invocation, affective intensity, in terms of invoking an action from the potential lender. Two things happen in that on one level you're thinking, oh my goodness, a person who does craft, I can actually see myself giving to somebody who shares this interest with me. And on the other level, you're thinking, I can empower this person. And because they're framing it in the level playing field of we'll all be entrepreneurs. So I'm still at a level that's hierarchically a better place, more expertise as an entrepreneur, so I will give. The very act of giving is hierarchical, right? So then you remark capital through financialization and coding of laboring networks. The laboring networks come through the leisure networks, through what we call digital labor and free labor of different, actually through the forms of digital domesticity in that sense, right? So reproduces that binary and flattens it. So as I was saying earlier, these kinds of engineering Fixit solutions that suggest that throwing up a technical interface, they don't successfully solve these problems. They create other problems. So the problem with viewing the technical as solution, that's how we enter this, right? We think, oh, this technical thing can provide the solution. And we fall back into the same traps of not thinking through for a social solution, right? Because it's much easier to go to a tool and say, this will fix it. However hard the actual IT work is. So I'm not saying that coding is easy. I'm saying conceptually, and in terms of our moral dilemmas, and in terms of our implications and complicities, it is much more comfortable to think that you can put a tool out there and fix it. So a conversation I have with my software engineer grown-up son sometimes is the talk around algorithms. And he's very clear that algorithms themselves, calling them sexist or racist doesn't achieve anything, but it's the people who code them, right? So he's concerned that those of us in the social sciences and humanities may be kind of giving rise to further issues by just calling the algorithms racist or sexist, because we're raising the work of the human being. And the fact that engineering Fixit solutions are being used to fix things, because the people are implicitly, they're part of a social category. And so I asked him, I hope he doesn't mind my referring to him here. So I asked him, I said, what about the many IT workers from places like Bangalore who actually contribute, or India? They're not white people, and they're not necessarily the richest of Indian society. And he said that we're not incentivizing coding in such a way that they have the incentive to develop diverse algorithms, right? So that's a labor issue. It's an issue of digital labor, worker rights issues. So if you have to go like a machine yourself, you become machinized, and you have to produce something in order to get your paycheck, you do not have the time, the incentive, or anything to actually change a social structure. So it's the hierarchies of management, hierarchies that encourage engineering solutions in a very singular fashion that there needs to be change in. The one or two individual programmers and coders who may be reproducing it may or may not be the ones to attack, right? So the problem with viewing the technical as a social and placing the technical outside the social. So we have, in all this, we have issues of the digital subaltern 2.0 stage, and it raises the issues not only of representation. And I repeat this often because a lot of us media scholars, we look at representation. That's very important. Representation is important on multiple levels. Representation as a democratic process, representation of visual, textual, that's important. But when you think in terms of digital subaltern 2.0, you also think in terms of questions about the terms of engagement with the global financial structure and the multiple layered labor hierarchies. So I'm clicking to the next. Okay. This then reminds us that economics is not outside of our social structures, right? So it's a form of storytelling as much. Storytelling is not a light thing. I mean, people think like when you start saying something is storytelling, they think we are belittling them. But making people aware that these things are storytelling isn't discounting it. It's about making all of us aware that storytelling, like in our object exercise yesterday, is situated. And so all narrative genres carry with them ideological implications. None of us is outside of ideology, right? And place limits on what is possible to do, think, or be within their boundaries. So if you simplify market economy logics of today, you'd say if the demand is up, supply can adequately satisfy it, then the market is strong. And then, of course, we're scrambling to create demand. And in the creation of this demand, we categorize we rationalize particular kinds of forms of exchange and interaction, right? So in regard to social media and microtransactions, in these online microfinance portals, the model of buy and sell is very much there. The lenders have created, quote unquote, a demand for borrowers. So the digital subaltern 2.0 has to be staged so that the lenders looking to lessen their guilt around the awareness that globally is possible, even as we increasingly watch more and more poor people around us, can at least feel good about contributing $25 to a cause. Previously, there were such things as adopt a child from the third world, and you got this letter from this child for having financed their education or something like that. So what happens here is this is a middle class, an even lower middle class. And in the words of Franklin Yarty, one of my PhD advisees, what this produces is the empowered lender. The question is, we still don't know what the empowered subaltern is. So it's still the empowered lender that we're looking at. So you have access for consumers wanting to consume the digital subaltern, right? If we see it, it must be true. Or even if it's not true, it allows me to do something that makes me feel good. So the creation of demand and supply, and of course it raises the question of whose desire is this based in, and how is this desire feeding into, again, economic capital flows or non-flows, as you like it. So the object of pity from 20 years ago now turns into the happy object. And here I use Sarah Ahmed's articulation of happy objects in relation to the economies of affect, affective economies. So whether it is digital migrants, we want to see happy objects. We want to see all this happiness, and then we monetize it. It's part of the startup model, right? So here you have a happy object where the woman of color is the lender. She's going to feel great. She's empowered. She's not the borrower. She's lending to a man. And you have here happy objects, them kind of helping each other out, right? Empowered third world women. I put this up, screenshots up, because this book actually has chapters that will kind of elaborate on these points. And in the first section, I have the NGOization, Latinization. But this is significantly brings together, yes?
If you could just go back to those
sure.
just happy objects.
Sure.
Okay.
Makes us happy.
Yeah, it does, it does. So, I mean, I have not revisited my microfinance work for quite some time.
Oh yeah, you're doing right.
Yeah,
Great,
yeah.
Great.
And I have not worked on online microfinance and things like that. But looking at this, I recalled the annual reports that I was doing when I was employed at, this is Indian School for Microfinance for Women in Ahmedabad, which is part of SEWA, Ila Bhatt SEWA. So I was working there as a research faculty just after my PhD for a year in Ahmedabad. So I remember where we had to organize, like for the annual report, we need photographs of women, right?
Yes.
And laboring women, happy women, working women, feeling, you know, like enjoying leisure. So for 3-4 days, we were like touring our areas and we were doing these photo shoots. And it was a professional photographer who was, you know, placing these women in this context. So they were asked to get like sometimes some tool, some like to dig and things like that. And it was very, very strategically placed. So it is not like a natural photograph like someone is like taking. It's like lot of thought, lot of idea goes to placing those photographs. And you will have like almost 100 photographs. And in that, there would be a committee who would sit and they would be picking up like, no, isme ye theek jata hai, isme ye nahi, you know, like in visual. So I never thought of it in that moment. But now when I see this, I could see, because those annual reports go to our funders, go to like, it's a whole thing. And then, and then the funder and all, and whoever is associated with us needs to feel that, yes, the money that I'm giving is leading to these kind of like happiness and okay, women are working, and these are very strong images of women, like women working, women, you know, like sitting in a group and talking to each other, and you have this, you'll have like one young girl like smiling like as if she has nothing to worry about, but all these are extremely staged, created. Yeah, it is created. It's not that they are not happy, but it is, there is a moment.
In that moment, they're happy.
Yes. Well, aap thoda khul ke haso na. So then she will like laugh khul ke, you know, like things like that. So yeah, I mean, I completely, it is like, I should go back to my annual reports.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm going to talk to you in a while, but I do want to point out that what happened there textually in terms of scholarship is she provided very clear evidence. You know, if I was writing this down, I would have quoted her, right? Because she provided very clear evidence for what I'm saying, as in, and also the point that I made, that this is not something that you are thinking in terms of evil plans. You believe you are doing good because you are catering to, let's get more funds. So as the NGO worker, you're really enthused. You are well-intentioned. And that's the point that my co-authors and I, a lot of whom were my graduate students at that point, who aren't graduate students anymore, kind of agonized over, is like, but these people, the people who work in the field, they mean well, they're doing good work. But what is subverting the good work you're doing? A certain accountability structure that privileges certain kinds of meanings. And that was brilliant, because that's exactly, you said that you haven't looked at online microfinance. Some of my exposure to offline microfinance was way back in the early 2000s, before these came up. But the point here is exactly that. These profiles come from existing organizations, MFIs. They are not putting their profiles up. It's precisely the reports that you're talking about. You're doing the labor. You do the work of putting these happy objects up. So that was a perfect kind of text, right? Here we had this up, and you provided all the evidence that comes from the field. It's like, oh my God, right? So if we had written it down, it could have been more perfect. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead if anyone else wants to talk.
Yeah, just to add on to what she said. So while she was explaining, the term which came into my head was staged. It's all staged there. And recently, I was working on the field with construction
Can you hear? Okay. Yeah.
With the construction laborers. And we were trying to interview them and few female construction laborers. And they somehow, they were aware what they're supposed to say. You know, even if I don't want to focus on the hardships maybe, I want to talk about their home way back in Jharkhand maybe, or what their family used to do. But they are like, नहीं वहाँ पे बहुत बुरा हाल था, बहुत ज़्यादा था, उसलिए हम यहाँ आए. But I mean, because then I later on figured out there was an NGO who visited before me, and you know they thought that even we are from an NGO, and that's why that is something that we want to hear. And the second thing was, I just saw this. I think so everyone must have it circulating on Facebook quite often. There's this child who's picking up garbage, and he's smiling, and the quote is, "You don't need money to be happy." And money can be found in the weirdest of places or something like that. You know, just to make us feel happy that we have money, but we are not happy, and they don't have money, but still they are.
And all the garbage we dump is just fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that child will come and pick it up.
Yeah. And he's happy doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the shift in kind of the way these things are framing, the framing of the poor, right? Yeah. Yes.
So I thought I'll hold my comments, questions.
No, don't hold.
Okay. Yeah, because now I'm getting really excited.
Good.
So you were talking about collaboration. So there was this workshop that I went to earlier where so there's this girl called Pooja. She's a health researcher, and she was describing a problem that she was facing. So she goes out in the field a lot, and she's built such a rapport with beneficiaries that they end up in their homes chatting for long hours. And then when she had to go back for this data collection work, the report writing, those women and men and children, the families were like, "Lekin aapko to ye pata hai. Why are you asking these questions again and again?" They want it on record. So the initial rapport building and the initial finding out the story kind of, during the record keeping, got in the way. And one of the senior professors there had a very simple solution. She said, "Well, you built the rapport. Why don't you have another person go and do the data collection?" They're not giving you answers because they think you already know this. And for them, it's a very staged thing to tell you the same things over and over again. So sometimes collaboration can happen in such simple ways as well.
Yes.
That was one. And another thing that I have to talk about is, so we speak about the panopticon, right? And it's very funny how the internet and digital and social media have sort of twisted the panopticon on its head. And we kind of surrender our data, our images, our faces, our bodies. We've become datafied so simply, and we don't mind being surveilled. So whether it's about social media or whether it's about Aadhaar, on Facebook I'm friends with this person, and he said, check your mobile phone contacts. And the yes, so the Aadhaar organization, UIADI, has inserted its numbers into our contact list.
Ooh.
And I mean, first I thought it was a hoax, but it's not a hoax. I actually checked it out. I tried calling the number, but I couldn't get through. Maybe it's because of my network issues, or maybe...
Yeah. You deleted it? Did you say you deleted it? Yeah, Google, totally Google. You did it. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Go. Any more? Mike.
Because in some of the just conversations that we were having about the same with my friends, we ended up talking how basically in India, so there's no law regulating Aadhaar. But because Google has inserted it, there are certain laws that are regulating it. So this whole thing is very interesting that how it's Google who has basically, sort of helped
Yeah.
breach our privacy.
Well, Google isn't as counter,
Yeah.
counter culture as it, or counter whatever, as it claims to be. It will work with each government according to their needs.
Yeah, just one clarification in the sense, like, when I use the word staged, I didn't mean that it was a lie.
Oh,
right?
no.
So I just want to make it, because there was like a lot of work that ISMW, SEVA and all were doing, and we were a very integral part of there. But sometimes it is almost like, if I have to say in terms of writing, how you present it.
It's a rhetorical framing.
Yes.
The rhetorical
So how you frame it and how you present it, the work that you are doing.
Absolutely.
So,
the point that I'm trying to make is not that it's not real or that's untrue or even completely without good intentions. What I'm trying to make is that in spite of all that, it's feeding into a certain structure, and perhaps if, as Davina pointed out, the collaboration works in such a way that there is an awareness. The well-intentioned NGO worker might then say, wait, I might do this differently. But then the responsibility is not just hers. It's a structural issue. So then, so it's also the speed with which we need the funding. Mike. Dr. Reddy speaking.
The visual language is so strong these days that, when you give these kind of reports, somewhere there is again, a kind of a hint that, if you don't compare with the kind of visuals already there, then it may not actually have the impact which it has to be created. So that pressure actually makes them to take the entire photographing, staging, choreographing, whatever we are using now, is basically to be compatible with the industrial standards which are created by, again, media, and of course the social media, which is again promoting that.
Yeah, and it's also the structures, right? Absolutely. The structures. It is again a consumer-oriented paradigm, right? So what is truth telling in that paradigm? How will we get the funds? Yeah. So in that sense, anyway, you got this. You can look at this one, because this is the one that connects yesterday's talk to this one, in one sense. So in looking, again, in talking about Digital Subaltern 2.0, I ask that we not confuse the essentialized authentic ideas of the subaltern, which is a whole other body of literature, right? Coming with the subaltern studies and recovering histories of the subaltern. Equally problematized is who is the subaltern, and why do we quote Spivak and Chatterjee and others more than we quote Kancha Ilaya's work, for instance. So these are all hierarchies that exist even in bodies of work that talk about the subaltern. So when I use the term subaltern, it is both strategic, invoking the idea of that literature, but also questioning in a different ways. So in that sense, examining the subaltern as staged is, even as I note, that there is, as both of you just noted, right? There is subaltern participation, but what is that participation? It goes back to the core, right? Goes back to the question of what does it mean for the ethnographer to become the spinner? The ethnographer did become a spinner, but it's not the same thing. So what does it mean when there is participation? They're not lying, but the participation in agency is always negotiated, and negotiated to the disadvantage of the subaltern in some ways. But sometimes even that little bit of whatever they get is better than the nothing they've been getting. So we're talking about bottom of the pyramid in that sense, becoming a place at which we can develop our careers, right? So the coding of multiculturalism, commodifying the other, is what we see here in terms of the coded interface. Mike.
Talking about the subalterns, I think even this class is one, because we are being recorded and we are being shown as happy faces in the GIAN portal.
Don't be so happy, guys. Don't be so happy. I don't think Madhavi is asking you to be happy. Yeah. Yeah, so should I go to the next slide? So in that sense, in coded fact, this multiculturalism is almost accidental, yet shaped by a labor force that is based in a tiered hierarchy of layered literacies. And here I'm quoting from my own book, Duh. So. All the points that I was previously made, except I've written them down. So, yeah. So we are then faced with the issue of authenticating the subaltern. Who authenticates the subaltern, right? So I think in different ways we authenticate the subaltern as subaltern through different hierarchies. We produce, through producing what affect scholars have called affective intensities at the interface. For the lending person, this affective intensity allows them to engage in affirmative gestures through an encounter with the staged subaltern. They will move towards affective restraints, affirmative gestures, and cooked and rotten data. I would suggest you read the articles that are in the Dropbox to make connections with these points. Because these are, I've just thrown them out there that I can explain later if you want. So what we have is that people want affirmation, right? People are like, why is critique in the negative? Yes?
I'm sorry, as soon as I saw this topic narrating the subaltern, I remembered fundraising platforms like Milap,
yes,
where they raise funds. So they, in a way, narrate the subaltern, right?
Yes, yes. That's the kind of platform I'm talking about. Okay. I haven't analyzed specific visual text from Milap, but Kiva and others are similar models. And what I would like to analyze in the long run, and what I'm trying to make time to do, is to look at the India-specific microfinance sites, whether they be Rangde, Milap, or Microgram, to see how these dynamics of staging the subaltern play out when they are not reaching for the westernized audience, the local context, local but different class context.
Yeah, but they are also creating digital subaltern, aren't they?
Yes, totally. I'm not saying they're not. They might say they're not. So yeah, absolutely. So, but what we saw with the looking for happy objects is all those words I put up in previous slides, then talking in terms of the affirmative turn. These production of the happy objects becomes necessitated because people are concerned that critique is not the only way to work towards empowerment, the negativity as they read it. So the affirmative turn then actually depends, as Greg and Sigberg point out, on this binary distinction between good and bad feelings. So we moved it from morality, from other, and other kinds of framings, to a framing of I feel good or I feel bad. So the affirmative turn is I should feel good if I want to give somebody something, right? Which is why we have those reports even. So, and it presumes that if I feel negatively toward the poor person, I'm a bad person, right? So I'm backward, conservative. However, if I'm liberal, if I'm this very inclusive person, I'm going to feel good when I look at the image. So rather than put the onus on the viewer, the onus is on the staging of the good feelings. And so that you're subtly or not so subtly staging somebody even in terms of behaviorally adequately within a Western etiquette framework, right? So that's the difference between the good colonial subject and the bad colonial subject, is whether they've learned their table manners. Chew with your mouth closed. So in that sense, when we take that and think in terms of backward conservative, so we're moving towards happy objects, sorry. So then we start questioning, as some affect scholars might claim and others might claim, that and earlier we've been talking about the transformation and shifts that perhaps are possible towards new modes of living with, going back also thinking about with as opposed to about or othering. When you offer feeling or the affective intensity as a possible way of connection, we begin to question that as a mode of transformation. And this then brings us to the point of how many of the affective interconnection, exchange, and spaces are often talked about in terms of ethics of care. Then you think about the commodification of care and care as a value that's commodified as well. I'll be elaborating on that in my next talk in September. I hope to talk about that, but right now I won't. But even in terms of transformation into new modes of living with, you also have the thought that that transformation will shift into a connection. This is what I faced with that chapter I wrote where I was saying there is no connection actually happening. The connection is being produced, it's being staged because of multiple people like yourself working to produce a staged subaltern. The interesting thing is when it went out for review for the journals, there was always a hopeful question from a reviewer saying, oh, but what about the connection happening here? So I realized that perhaps I couldn't rewrite it often enough to make it clear the connection was actually being elided. Not because either of the lender or the NGO worker was intentionally not wanting that connection, but the transformation that was happening to produce a good effect, the good subject effect. So whether you're talking about cooked data, rotten data, data emerges from regimes of interpretation. And as Sarah Ahmed points out, affects and emotion and all these lovely things that we bring into our research nowadays makes us feel good too as researchers. However, it's not outside of the socio-political. It's not outside of political economies. So talking about affective political economies makes you think in terms of the good affect as being problematic as well. So you consume the other as a happy object. So here you go. That's what I meant. We can do it, $25 at a time, right? So microfinancing the subaltern, digitally staged subaltern as happy object rather than unhappy object, converts bad feelings, whether they be racist, sexist, casteist, whatever, by erasing and transforming the guilt of all these into benevolence, into generosity, because we can do it. We can actually be empowered lenders giving the $25 we might be able to afford, right? So the complexities of any human being where we have all these bad feelings as part of our very socio-cultural subject position through our everyday practices even. The mapping that Kalpana Kanibaran does in talking about folk tongues gets erased and flattened because suddenly I can prove that I'm not racist, casteist, otherwise by giving those $25 because I believe we should have entrepreneurs from every category in the world. So we will empower, we will feel empowered to empower. So we will know that what that is like knowing that my investments are making a positive impact in the world. So the digital subaltern, the subaltern borrower, has become my investment. Then you take it away from, you bring it into the space of feeling in the staging, you bring it into the space of, and then through bringing it into the space of feeling, you flatten the morality, you flatten the problematics of hierarchies, and then you further make it synthetic by bringing it into the language of monetary exchange. So here, this person has become my investment. So we are going to stage global giving in this way. We monetize social identities. We monetize feelings. Pausing to see if anyone has anything to say. I'm sure you'll have lots to say as we proceed. So. And again, monetizing social identities. We go back to a microfinance investment you can help create. It's your opportunity to strengthen families all over the world at the click of a button. Mouse, type, keys, anything else.
I'd just like to,
Go ahead.
The word that stood out for me was investment, because suddenly there is an implication that if you invest, you will get a return. And the return might not be monetary, but it might be something to do with self-esteem, self-actualization, or at least the illusion of self-actualization that I have arrived. I'm changing the world through my investment. And I can boast about it.
I couldn't possibly be a bad person. I give.
How can I be a bad person? Yeah.
Yeah. So if all these other people that I work with are telling me I am, I couldn't be, because I give.
And how convenient. Like, I don't even have to go and get my hands dirty. Yeah. I can just approach them online, and as you said, with a click, I can do so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then share it on Facebook also.
Yeah.
You can also
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are you waiting for?
Totally. Totally. Yeah, and then guilt the others. Yeah. Do you want to share it with us? Yeah, I think you should. Because I'm feeling left out here.
Sorry, I thought it won't be relevant, so I was just
Oh,
confirming.
nothing's irrelevant, believe me.
So nowadays you get these links. Will it also include the medical help people need nowadays? And you know, you have these pictures of these children in the hospitals, and they're like, if you give 500 rupees a month, then this person will survive from malnutrition and everything.
Totally, it's the same framework.
So there's this link where you go and pay, and you're paying for the medical assistance.
Yeah, the framework is possible everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, but then they're not happy objects, because I think the context is such that it's not happy, but...
Well, and that's the slippage, right? When they don't, that's the slippage, and that's what I was trying to see even in relation to whether Milap and Rangde and internally to India, we are in the place where happy objects will sell the idea of giving, or we're in a place where that misery will, because we are in a different dynamics of that, right? But you might then find some element of agency embedded there that's trying to show us their worth. So you're not just throwing the money away. These are not worthless human beings. These are human beings who don't look happy, but at the same time are productive human beings worthy of saving in some way. So that might be the difference there. How that particular image demonstrates a productive human being. So this person was aspiring to be something. All they need is this. Okay, thank you guys. Another talk wrapped up. Q&A.
I have a question. You could answer, others could also pitch in.
Just pitch in, jump in, yes.
Yes. So for me, as I'm experiencing this workshop and other such experiences, digital is revealing itself to be an intensely capitalist network.
Oh, absolutely.
So one is I want thoughts on that. And so this is also in context to something that I was reading. Fuchs was arguing that when Boyd says that I'm only interested in one aspect of young people's presence online, and I'm not looking at the economics of it. So
Boyd?
Yes. So Fuchs is a little critical of that. He says when...
Christian Fuchs.
Yes. That when you're looking at a network which is inherently so capitalist, how can you ignore such a big aspect of it? And this ties back to this other person I met from Lebanon. And he was saying that his students in class increasingly pressurize him to keep calling influencers in class because they think that that's a very easy way to make money. And whenever an influencer is called, the class is full. There are no absentees. And every time this question is posed by the students to any influencer, irrespective of whether it's someone who's doing stuff for food or makeup or health and fitness, when they are asked, how is it exactly that you actually incentivize or monetize this activity of yours, they don't really have answers to give. Now, is it just because they are trying to be secretive of their business model, or they're still trying to figure it out? I mean, who knows what the reasons could be. So that is one. And second is I was reading a lot of interviews of Facebook employees and how when they were actually doing those things, like programming the algorithm in a certain way, or creating the news feed of people in a certain way, they didn't really understand the repercussions that that would have.
Micro work.
Yes. And how they just did it because they had certain targets to fulfill, and how after quitting and after seeing the results of that programming, how they've become so self-aware about things that can go amiss when you're only looking at profits.
Yes.
And for most of them, social media is a no-no for their families. They especially keep their children away from Facebook and other such social media platforms.
Because they're in on that. I don't know if I'm right, but I'm just thinking.
Well, none of us is right.
Yeah. So in reference to the first question that you had, I think, of course, you have to be cognizant of the political economy of everything, but I think it would help not to think in such a structuralist manner. For instance, about Uber drivers, about how they're trying to bring, how they're trying to exploit drivers by not giving incentives properly or reducing them. And Telangana saw a huge strike. So drivers wanted a union and all of that. But there are strategies and tactics that they use. For instance, if you're going on a long ride, they'll ask you if they can break it up so that they can meet the kilometers that they have to meet, that goal. So I think it makes sense that while being cognizant of the political economy and the restrictions that it might place, to also think of how people, they try to reassert their agency or try to claim, their space. So maybe it would help to think in that manner instead of thinking it as a binary.
Absolutely, and even in the two scholars you positioned, Fuchs and Boyd, you would find that each of them is probably stuck to their position, which is it makes both their work have certain problematics, and then you could probably then go to looking at other people's work to look at other models of class. Also, I mean, I would recommend looking at Kylie Jarrett's work on digital housewives as well, and there's many others. And if you're thinking about time, the role of time in what Saya Mulya was just saying, I would look at Sarah Sharma's work on temporality. She actually did interview taxi drivers in New York in relation to some of the things. So, I mean, I'm just giving you some, and of course, Aradhana Sharma's Logics of Empowerment is very intriguing. Yeah, I can give you a whole lot of things to kind of disrupt. This is what it is, right? The most visible names, well done work, but still, the most visible names and their debates sometimes don't give us enough to flesh things out. And also, as I said, while what you said in the beginning is very self-evident, right? So you might get a pushback as in saying, so what's wrong with it being capitalist? So just that characterizing itself lends itself to being you getting a punch under the belt, sort of, and that's actually why the problem is with everybody calls everything neoliberal. So it's not explaining anything. So instead of falling into this either or framework, find the utility in both their work and put them in conversation, but find other people who have fleshed it out in interesting ways.
I just want you to throw some light on this. There is a particular trend which is happening, like fortune giving away, which is a Western concept. Very recently, even Indian corporates like Nandan Nilekani's wife has written all her fortunes in the form of a philanthropy. What kind of impact it has on the global north? Or we have been getting much more influenced by these kind of corporates writing away all their fortunes in the name of a philanthropy. I just want to...
Can you explain a little more about that context?
Like writing away their wealth for the charity kind of thing, charity giving away.
How much of their wealth?
Ma'am?
How much of their wealth?
Whatever they have earned, because when I speak of Nandan Nilekani, who was a part of Wipro and all, for a part of Infosys, okay, his wife is basically a philanthropist. So what they have done is they have written away their fortune, whatever they have earned in the name of philanthropy, which is there all over the media, which is there all over the social media, which so can be a part of motivation.
They get the good fields, right? They get the good press. That money probably is nothing in their whole scheme of things. In their larger scheme of what their property ownership and income is, that particular bit of money probably is nothing. Would have gone away to the taxes. So it's good that they gave it away. I mean, that's a good thing. But still, what I'm trying to say is that, so what was your question?
That's what I just wanted to say, how it, because many of the people have been affected and influenced by this Western philanthropic thing.
Oh, absolutely, but it's also here. It's not just Western, right? So it's also here.
It's been catching up even in India.
Yeah, it's a structure. It's that structure that's everywhere. And so, yeah, I mean, at least they're doing something good, I suppose, but it really is just a drop in the ocean for them to give that money away, right? Where's it going? Somebody else has a point? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have a point to this. I have another question. Yeah?
Okay.
So I was more interested in the way you talked about data. So when we are talking about data, so I can see that there are three possibilities here, right? So one, the idea that the data in itself would have, like whatever comes off, whether it has its own meaning, or whether the meaning that as a researcher I create of the data, or the meaning that the person who is sharing the data gives that experience, right? So as a researcher, what I should be looking at? So does data in purity is a very weird word, but in itself has any meaning, or is it mostly what we make of it, or what the informant or the person experience, and that becomes our data, that meaning? I don't know, I'm making sense. But
Yesterday's, there's more things to say. I think Madhavi has something to say.
We do get this, I mean, when we talk in the classroom also about how to read films, we actually look at from this framework. Whether are we getting the meaning from the content, or is it in the minds of the audiences, or is it in the mind of the producer or the director who made the film? So it's always a negotiation between all the three. Because in which context we are actually looking at the meaning. Is it through the audiences? Of course, we have a different meanings, because at the end of it, they are the receivers. Are we doing a content analysis so that we look at the data and we look at the film and also read it? But at the same time, we cannot negate one of it or take one as an ultimate meaning, because it's always, transforms, or, sometimes seamlessly, sometimes, we need to again, take it from where we are actually contextualizing our meanings. This is what we actually do it in, understanding the content. But the data is also a content at the end of it. So I'm just wondering, like, we do this.
Yeah, no, actually, you gave the answer, but I'm going to give the answer in terms of data. There is a book called Raw Data is an Oxymoron. There is no such thing as data outside of people who make meaning of it. This is also goes back to the ideology. It's about hiding the ideology, right? So we try to make it, that's why for me getting multiple meanings, like Madhavi pointed out, multiple readings provides more information about the scenario than to think that there is only one meaning associated with the data. So yes, even if we want to go back to looking to our little box of mints yesterday, it seemed as though there was only one absolute meaning to that object, because it was stamped with the obvious sign. But as an object, it did have multiple meanings. So let's say you saw it lying around on somebody's table and you went to interview this person, or you were doing an ethnography. So you were doing an ethnography of your microfinance borrower. She had it lying around in her house. So immediately you're thinking, wow, she's using mints. In actuality, you don't know how that box traveled to her. and you don't know what she has inside it.
I'm sorry, I'm hogging the mic.
Hog away.
Yeah, just because, you know, she was mentioning how do you make meaning and all. I was thinking, and I might be digressing here, but there's this reader response theory in literary theory, in the sense that, you know, where you're from, what you're going through, your context matters a lot in the way you interpret what you've just read. So I think it makes sense even for media theory that, you know, that your location is pretty much important.
Absolutely. What I'm saying is it makes sense beyond media and literature. Where we know this from the frameworks we do our work, but makes sense even if you're doing statistical analysis. That's what I'm trying to say, that raw data is an oxymoron. Because the tools you have for statistical analysis, they allow you to see certain things, certain relations. And statisticians will tell you this, that it is a story told as well.
I just wanted to respond to what Sapna ma'am was saying. Philanthropy isn't essentially a Western
Wait a minute,
concept.
I missed who's talking. Oh, go ahead. Huh? Davina?
Yes,
sorry.
Sorry.
You're so, I was looking at her and I was like, she's not talking because she has the mic. I'm so sorry. And it sounded like Javina's voice. How did this happen? Sorry. The object exercise obviously got to me. Yes, go ahead.
So we have a lot of Indian philanthropy happening way before Western philanthropy as well. So Jainism has a lot. So yeah, I think Madhavi ma'am was also talking about the same thing when you. Yeah, sorry.
माइक चालू करो.
राइट. यदि शोधकर्ता शोध के दौरान अपने विषय से संबंधित सामग्री का अंतर्वस्तु विश्लेषण करता है.
आपको हमको बताना पड़ेगा कि शोध क्या है.
मैम इट्स रिसर्च.
हाँ, ठीक है.
अंतर्वस्तु विश्लेषण करने के दौरान यदि प्राप्त सामग्री के विश्लेषण से ये प्राप्त होता है.
बोलिए, don't worry about everyone else. Say this is very nice. You made us self-conscious now.
तो जो अब मैं थोड़ा मिक्स में आ जाती हूँ.
आप बहुत शुद्ध हिंदी बोलते हैं. मेरा पतिदेव बोलते हैं मगर मुझे मालूम नहीं. I'm from Hyderabad.
No issue मैम. डेटा एनालाइज करने के बाद ये पता चलता है कि उसमें जो मेरे से संबंधित विषय से संबंधित डेटा है वो भी काम का है और मैं वो ना लूँ जिसे आपका परसेप्शन है, जिसे इनका परसेप्शन है, तो इसे बायसनेस नहीं कहा जाएगा.
क्या बायस नहीं कहा जाएगा? है ना. अच्छा, तो
आपने अपने नजरिए से, अपने परसेप्शन से, आपने अपने संदर्भ में ही बात कही है, लेकिन उसका मीनिंग बहुत.
मेरा मतलब है कि there is no research without bias. So you make your bias visible by stating who you are, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, as in feminist work, what we are saying is reveal your possible biases. You may not know all your biases, but at least reveal so that the reader has the information to know that these come from a certain location. So in that sense, I'm asking for honesty rather than unbiased work. So honest as much as is possible. So bias to hoga hi. Everything is biased. I'm saying that everything, there is nothing that's not biased.
But still, after doing all these necessary decisions, while checking the examiner, why ask these unnecessary questions, you have already done a biasness. And still, there should no biasness in your study.
Yeah, but that's not the paradigm I'm working with. I don't believe that there is no non-biased study, right? So there is, that's why we said we are all ideologically grounded in that sense. We come from a location. So this is where we take from feminist work such as Donna Haraway said, the situated knowledges. But that doesn't mean that anything goes, right? So we work with the evidence, and that's why what we are emphasizing even in this workshop is you have to, when you write about your reflective essay, your findings have to come from the evidence. They have to come through your interaction with actual evidence. So if somebody says, for instance, no, I think this happens, and your interviewee has not said that, that's not valid in that sense, right? That's, if we can use the word valid.
So true.
So that, because I'm not able to locate, you're not allowing us to locate your bias, right? You're saying it as if, because you know it, it is. But then, if it's something that your interviewee said, and you are co-constructing the meeting, you are interpreting it, you will map how this connects. So let's say that I was standing up there and talking about the stage subaltern, and I talked about the multiple forms of labor that goes into the staging of the subaltern. I'm speaking from having read and interviewed people such as her who have told me that this is how these things happen. So in the larger work, I would point to evidence, right? But even then, it is meaning that's co-produced in the sense that people might contest it, but my location, our location, reveals this. So there is truth and honesty, but it's not completely unbiased in the sense of how it's there. Am I making sense?
Yeah. But somehow they said, जो आपको लाना था वही आप ले आए.
Yeah, absolutely.
तो आपने क्या research किया?
Absolutely. So you say that अपना interview में ये था, ये सब था. उन्होंने ये भी बताया, वो भी बताया. तो इसमें क्या आ रहा है? Because I've got this, excuse my Hindi. because
Ma'am, you please speak in English. I can understand it.
She speaks like my Pati Dev. That's okay. Which is why at some point in our life, I told him not to speak in Telugu and I'm just speaking in English. So anyway, that's right. But what I'm trying to say here is that when that you have multiple forms of evidence to draw from to make a point. But even in the evidence, there is pushback in that evidence. You have to make sense. So you can't just say, this person has, said this. So let's suppose we got the information about how things are being staged. But that very same person also talked about this other stuff that contradicts this. It's your job as researcher to look at both, not just one, and think about what this means. So in that sense, for me, the word, the concept of biased research becomes, it's not useful, right? Because there's always bias. And you need to note which is your bias, definitely. But to assume that you're going to produce anything unbiased, to me, is not useful.
Generally, my students also ask me this question, and when I talked about situated knowledge and the whole thing of objectivity, biasness and all comes. So sometimes I start with this whole argument कि यानी विषय बहुत रहता है हमारे सामने, है ना? आपने एक ही विषय पे चूज़ किया, तो वहीं से हम बायस होना शुरू हो गए हैं, है ना? कि क्योंकि अगर मैं बोलूँगी नहीं नहीं ये पत्रकारिता में इसमें कुछ नहीं है, वायलेंस ही ज़्यादा इम्पॉर्टेंट है, आपने क्यों वायलेंस नहीं बोले? आप बोलेंगे नहीं मुझे वो उस पर ही करना था न्यूज़पेपर पे, और आपने एक चूज़ भी किया है, 100 न्यूज़पेपर है हिंदी में, पर आपने एक ही वो चूज़ किया है ना. तो कैसे भी हो हम बायस को हम नहीं हटा सकते. नहीं नहीं नहीं, एक मिनट. तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि जब हम रिसर्च करते हैं, अगर आप अपने जो मेथोलॉजी जो चैप्टर है, अगर वहाँ आपने साइंटिफिकली वो प्लेस किया, और वो जो फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी, अब जो भी मेथोडोलॉजी आप यूज़ कर रहे हो, जो थियोरेटिकल पैराडाइम की जिसके हिसाब से आप क्यों ये मेथड यूज़ करते हो, आपका आपका आर्गुमेंट कैसे आएगा, अगर आप वो मेथोडोलॉजी चैप्टर में ही अगर आपने वो प्लेस किया तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि एग्जामिनर का कहीं भी स्पेस रहेगा ये बात करने के लिए कि आपने बायस है, क्योंकि हम वो साइंटिफिकली इन टर्म्स ऑफ आर आर्ग्यूमेंट ही हमने वो डाला है कि हम वो फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी अगर आप वो यूज़ कर रहे हो तो उस हिसाब से मैंने ये डेवलप किया है। तो ऑब्वियसली ये जो आप मेथोडोलॉजी आप लिखोगे, जिस वे से आप सोचोगे, आप अपने गाइड के साथ बात करके वो डेवलप होगा। तो ऑब्वियसली अगर आपका वो क्वालिटेटिव है तो वो एक एग्जामिनर जो क्वांटिटेटिव पे डिपेंड करता है, बिलीव करता है, उसके पास वो थीसिस जाएगा ही नहीं, बिकॉज वो पहली बात से वो
जाना भी नहीं चाहिए।
हाँ, बिकॉज वो फिर बायस होगा। हाँ, वो बायस होगा। तो मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है कि इसका एक साइंटिफिकली ही उसका एक आंसर है जो आप मेथोडोलॉजी में उसको वो आप डील कर सकते हो, उसको आप प्लेस कर सकते हो अपना जो हाँ, और वो जस्टिफिकेशन ये सिर्फ अनुरेखा या आपका जस्टिफिकेशन नहीं है, ये वो मेथड का जस्टिफिकेशन है, वो थ्योरी का जस्टिफिकेशन है। यस यस, एंड द होल थॉट प्रोसेस कि एक दिन मैं उठी सुबह और मुझे लगा कि ये है, ये भी हो सकता है। नहीं नहीं, हो सकता है, नहीं हो सकता है।
You can say that.
या कि मैं बहुत सारा मैं सोच रही थी पर एक दिन मुझे लगा कि नहीं, सुबह 4 बजे की नहीं, मुझे इस पे ही करना है, जो सच भी होता है ना। पर उसका हम प्लेस कैसे करें, वो थॉट प्रोसेस कैसे प्लेस करें और वो थ्योरी में कैसे डालें और वो कैसे हम मेथोडोलॉजी चैप्टर में डील करेंगे, आई थिंक दैट विल टेक केयर। सो यू डोंट हैव टू, उस पर आप स्ट्रेस नहीं लेना चाहिए।
And then you must talk to your supervisors so they don't get you an examiner. What shall I talk on Monday? Tangled wires. Tangled wires, yeah. Oh yeah, the guest one is in the afternoon. Yeah, she'll come. She's bringing samples. Huh? Oh well, the mic is right next to her. पूछ लीजिए. Oh wow, I'm almost scared now. Go ahead.
No, just I was sharing to Anurekha ma'am ki actually when we are taking the quantitative thing, so we have the data and we are finding out the relationship between the two variables, and on this. On the basis of our finding, we can prove that we are not biased. These are the things have come out with our data. So there is no point of being biased or because your data is showing you what you have done and what result and what relationship has come out between the variables, isn't it?
So many 3-4 pre-submission in my university. The examiner always asks this question. जो आपका हाइपोथेसिस था वही आपने प्रूफ कर डाला. So that is the question raised by myself only. Is this?
No, but that is different. I think though जो आपका हाइपोथेसिस था वही प्रूफ डाला, that's different, because that means you haven't done the research and you're making a.
मुझे लगता है कि ये जो बेसिक डिफरेंस है, फंडामेंटल डिफरेंस है ज्ञान निर्मिति के प्रोसेस में, उसका ये सवाल है ना, लाइक हाउ डू यू प्रोड्यूस नॉलेज, राइट? आई थिंक वहाँ वो क्वेश्चन आता है. हाँ, क्योंकि ये क्वालिटेटिव में जैसे ज्ञान ऐसे हमने अगर किया अभी तक हमें जितना समझता है, तो एक प्रोसेस है कि हम क्वालिटेटिव मेथोडोलॉजी में जाके हम जो भी ज्ञान है we create knowledge or we follow quantitative. Till now,
I don't agree that quantitative is always unbiased.
Yes, that's what. कि जो डेटा जैसे
the
अभी
data itself is given.
Exactly. जैसे अभी मैडम का क्वेश्चन था जो quantitative follow करे. If we follow the quantitative, there are 2 data sets variable, and you prove and therefore there is no bias. I think the problem वहाँ से भी आता है. It comes that whose data are we talking about, right?
Yes.
So if you're talking, for example, agar wo statistics mein hai ki, if you have less number, then you have to talk to more number of people. But if you have like 1 lakh people, 381 or something is the number. If you talk to that many people, it will be statistically significant. हाँ, तो मेरा सवाल है कि 382 का जो person है ना? 364, okay, whatever. I am not good at that. Right? So which is the number that we say logical number? What happens to the person who comes after the man? I'm more interested in what that person talks about. So I think, I don't know what I'm thinking now, but yeah, let's see. So basically ये है कि अगर हम ये मान के चले, if we start with this assumption that quantitative will give us unbiased data and qualitative will give us biased data, that itself is a very, very false binary. You know? So data itself is extremely contextual. Right? Yes. So it doesn't mean that if you follow one methodology or the other, it will give you a data which is not contextual. All data would be contextual, but depending upon where you come from, आपका जो discipline है, आपका जो methodological perspective है, जो methodology का perspective है, उस जो epistemology यानी जो ज्ञान निर्मिति का process हम करते हैं, वो हम कौन सा follow करते हैं, उस पे आपका data base रहेगा.
And rather than talk about, again, I want to say that good quantitative researchers do not assume that there is no bias. So they don't, right? So what I'm trying to say is rather than talk about bias in that particular way, we must talk about the integrity of the research process. So have you made the effort to ask multiple forms of questions when you're interviewed, for instance? Have you made the effort to push on in different directions? Have you listened, right? And similarly for the quantitative researcher, where was the survey distributed? How many people was it distributed to? All those, yeah, how was the question designed? And so all those are processes that need to be described, even in quantitative methods. So where did we talked about the research question. Qualitative.
Triangulation method को हम use कर सकते हैं, जैसे quantitative में, नहीं, जैसे कि आपने कोई रिसर्च किया, ठीक है, तो आप ट्रायंगुलेशन मेथड यूज़ कर सकते हैं, जैसे कि आप फील्ड पे गए, इंटरव्यू लिए और सेकेंडरी सोर्स आपने कलेक्ट किया और केस स्टडी लिया, तो इन सभी चीज़ों से मिक्स आपका अगर रिजल्ट एक आ रहा है तो यानी आप बायसनेस नहीं है, आपने जिस भी तरह से आप रिसर्च कर रहे हो रिजल्ट एक ही आ रहा है, तो बायसनेस कहाँ हुआ उसमें फिर, ठीक है?
I want to say something in this context. I think as a researcher, when we are choosing a method or when we are even choosing a topic, the process of choosing a topic or the thinking process of what method we choose and why we choose it should be clear in our mind first, before we can explain it to the examiner or to our even mentor. Absolutely. I mean, for example, when I started thinking about my PhD topic, it was a very big, broad one as with everyone. I thought about working on understanding caste in Bengal. Then my mentors told me that it can't be so broad. She first gave me readings on social history on Bengal. So when I was reading on social history on Bengal, but I was not reaching anywhere. And then suddenly, just by chance, I chanced upon a Marathi article which talked about the Dalit literature movement in Bengal. And I was simultaneously doing a course in Dalit literature movement in Maharashtra. And then it dawned upon me that I want to understand caste in Bengal through the Dalit literature movement. So if it is clear in my mind what was the process that I went through and why am I choosing that particular method, I think it's easier to deal with these biases and questions.
Yeah, which gets back to the point of what is your research question? Yeah. More? I think we have 3 minutes more. It's been a very productive session for me too. I mean, all of it, all the sessions. So I'll see you guys on Monday Monday morning, I promise to, and again, it won't be completely different, right? It's like dragging out a whole research agenda and talking about how they're interrelated. So the happy objects will come out in different forms. Again, Shobha, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just wanted to know, will we be discussing the readings bit?
Yeah, I think, that's the other part I wanted to say is that before we wrap up now, is we think that it's now time to start looking at the readings, actually choose readings that we can discuss. So on Monday, I will give the lecture, and then in the afternoon we have a guest. So what you can do on Monday is also probably after the lecture, we can spend the time thinking about which readings. So maybe if each of you can select a couple of readings that you would ideally like to read together, and the readings can be done in groups to make this productive for you. And that's probably what we will do on Tuesday. That's the 7th, right? And so we will take up the readings on Tuesday. So if by Monday you have, you paired up in groups and stuff, however you want to do it, if I get a sense of what the readings that are going to be focused on. So shall we just say who's going to represent who, and who's going to send me a message or an email to say which readings? Then what we can do is on Tuesday, we can focus on the readings and the themes that from the readings and that we can flesh out in relation to perhaps your interviews. Because I think it's on Wednesday.
But ma'am, you said on Tuesday we are going to workshop the interviews?
We did a lot of workshopping of the interviews. I think we've been turned blue workshopping. So your second interviews can just sit, because that's one thing that I realized in conversation with some of you is that your time might be better spent looking at the readings now, because you've got a significant amount of the theoretical concepts even from the lectures I've given and how I've used them methodologically and otherwise in my work. If you take up the readings, so let's say a couple of you are reading Bolstoff's work on big data and Cook data and the others. A couple of you are reading on logics of empowerment. A couple of you might be reading something else to do with digital labor. So what will happen is each group will then flesh them out and come up with the significant concepts and themes that are coming from that reading. Then we can have discussions around how these then work towards the themes emerging in your interviews. So the point there is that what we are calling as theory building can only adequately happen after the reading. So, because that's where we're all kind of reaching out and trying to figure out what's going on, because the themes are the themes that are the themes. Then there's meaning making with your interviewee. Now let's go to the academic structures and take the meaning that you're getting from your interviewees or in interaction with them, and then connect them and see what meaning happens here. So you might find, for instance, that Dana Boyd, Christian Fuchs argument fleshed out through your interview or through another article. So, make sense? So you do need to do your second interview, because your first and your second interviews will come into your readings. So happy weekend. I see you Monday.